Yes, the name of the video today really is called 12 Biblical Prophecies That Even Skeptics Admit Came True. Am I clickbaiting the hell out of you? No, this was a real article that I read on MSN, and so it's out there on a major publication, and the author is somebody by the name of Yvonne Gabriel. Now, do you guys remember I did another article off MSN, and the name of the author was George Michael? 'Cause I gotta have faith. And I could not find a George Michael. I'll link that video above because you guys really seem to like it. But I did find Yvonne Gabriel. I did find this author, and she actually writes for a content farm. I don't know that she is an actual apologist. I have no idea. But I wanted to see, are these Bible prophecies, are there any ones that I can admit came true? So let's see it. Let's do it. Here's how it starts. Strip away the theology and you're left with an awkward fact skeptics rarely dispute. History keeps lining up with the Bible's boldest predictions. For centuries, critics and believers have debated the validity of biblical text, often clashing over the timeline of when specific predictions were actually written down. While skeptics argue that many prophecies were recorded after the events took place, they rarely dispute that the events themselves happened as described. Modern archaeology has unearthed physical evidence that matches these biblical descriptions, forcing even the harshest critics to acknowledge the historical accuracy of the texts. Whether one views these as divine foresight or astute political observation, the correlation between the written word and the historical reality is undeniable. Right off the bat, it doesn't sound good, does it? It doesn't sound good. But let's see number one. Okay, so the first one is the fall of Babylon. I'm sure you've all heard this, but let's see what she has to say. The prophet Isaiah described the total overthrow of Babylon, predicting it would be like Sodom and Gomorrah and never habited again across generations. The ancient superpower, known for its hanging gardens and thick walls, eventually fell into ruin and remains an uninhabited archaeological site in modern-day Iraq. Even Alexander the Great, who intended to restore the city to its former glory, died before he could begin the project, leaving the ruins untouched. Skeptics might argue about dating of the text, but they agree that the city's fate matches the biblical description of total desolation. Visitors today only find mounds of earth and broken bricks where a majestic empire once stood, fulfilling the eerie prediction of permanent silence. The once bustling hub of culture and power is now a stark testament to the fragility of human empires. So Isaiah was writing, or whoever wrote this part of Isaiah, was writing about 700 BC. That's the best guess of when this was written. So let's go over the prophecies one by one, because this person doesn't go into them, in detail. So I'm going to have to read these because, I can't memorize all this. So let's go over exactly what the prophecy of Isaiah was. So it said, 1, God would muster an army for war, who would come across from faraway lands to the ends of the heavens and destroy the whole country of Babylon. The army would be the Medes. This would be the people from Media. Okay, so this is the Medes. That's important. Keep that in your back pocket. The people, the whole entire population would be utterly annihilated. Every Babylonian who didn't manage to flee their native land would be slaughtered, imprisoned, even infants and children. So the specifics of the women aren't mentioned, but I'm assuming they would be carried off as, booty, right? I didn't mean it in that way. I meant war booty, but I guess booty too. Except it did say that they would be raped. The city would be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah, and it would never be inhabited or lived in again. That's important. Babylon's name, survivors, offspring, and descendants would be wiped out. Isaiah also predicted this would be happening during the end times, as it's at the day of the Lord, and it would be accompanied by the blackening of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And when God's wrath would be upon the world, and its population would be scarcer than gold. It would be accompanied by earthquakes. And afterwards, the captive Jews would take possessions of the nations and make them male and female servants in the Lord's lands. And the lands would be at rest and peace. That's the prophecy. But what actually happened? What actually happened? Did any of that actually happen? Okay, let's look at the problems with the prophecy. Number one, Babylon was conquered in 539 BCE by the Persians under Cyrus II, not the Medes. The Medes didn't do it, so that's the first problem. It was the Persians. In fact, Cyrus had already conquered the Medes, so they were no longer in existence by 539 BCE. Cyrus did not destroy the whole country. In fact, he incorporated it into his own empire. Two, the Persian takeover wasn't particularly bloody. It really was not a bloodbath. He didn't annihilate everyone because he actually wanted the people under his control. So it did, of course, it was a wealthy and powerful city. And so it really didn't start weakening until about 275 BCE. And then, the whole area did gradually weaken, and there was just a small population left over, but they weren't totally annihilated. And number three, have Jews taken over the world? Now, I don't want any anti-Semitic comments in here. You know what I mean. I don't mean it in that way. But I mean, are they literally populating the whole world, and is the world at peace? No. So, no, none of that came true. That's all a lie. Every single bit of it's a lie. But let's see if the second one is better. Let's see. Number two is the destruction of Tyre. So let's take a look at what the author has to say. Ezekiel predicted that the city of Tyre would be thrown into the sea and its stones, timber, and dust laid in the water. History confirms that Alexander the Great built a causeway using the debris of the old mainland city to reach the island fortress during his famous siege. This specific detail of scraping the city clean like a bare rock seems improbable until military strategy necessitated it centuries later. While the city has been rebuilt in various forms, the ancient Phoenician capital as it existed is effectively wiped off the map in the manner described. Archaeological records support the narrative that the original materials were indeed cast into the sea to facilitate the conquest. Okay, so it's really important that we read Ezekiel and see what the prophecy actually says. So it says, this is from Ezekiel 26:12 through 14. They will plunder your wealth and loot your merchandise. They will break down your walls and demolish your fine houses and throw your stones, timber, and rubble into the sea. I will put an end to their noisy songs, and the music of your harps will be heard no more. I will make you a bare rock, and you will become a place to spread fish nets. You will never be rebuilt, for I, the Lord, have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. So, even if you want to say Alexander the Great fulfilled this prophecy, even though the prophecy never talks about Alexander the Great, the prophecy says that the city of Tyre will never be rebuilt, and it will just be rocks where people just fish off of, and that's not true. It never, ever has not been rebuilt. Tyre was rebuilt, and it's right now one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. Number three, the succession of empires. This one's an interesting one. This is an interesting one. All right, so the book of Daniel describes a dream of a statue made from 4 different metals, representing 4 successive world empires starting with Babylon. Historians universally recognize the sequence of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome as the dominant powers that shaped the Western world. The transition from the gold head to the iron legs depicts a clear historical progression that no serious scholar denies occurred. Critics often claim this was written during the Greek era, yet they admit the Roman Empire, the legs of iron, rose to power exactly as the pattern suggested. The eventual fragmentation of the Roman Empire into smaller, weakened kingdoms also mirrors the feat of iron mixed with clay as described in the text. The geopolitical roadmap effectively outlined the course of Western history for centuries. Okay, so she's talking about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2 that Daniel, taught. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't figure out what this dream meant. And so Daniel was able to pray, and God told him exactly what the dream meant. Now, like all apologists, and I don't know that secular historians take any account of this, but she's talking about how apologists will retrofit, Rome, etc., into these succession of empires. Like, of course there's always a succession of empires. When has there never not been a succession of empires. What difference does that make? I mean, we've had a succession of empires since Roman time. Like, that doesn't even make any sense to me. But anyway, just predicting a succession of empires, wow. Who couldn't do that? Like, anyone that's studied middle school history would know that there's always been a succession of empires. That's the first thing. But she's also leaving out the most important part of the prophecy, okay, that is undisputed, never happened. The biggest part of the prophecy she's leaving out that says there will be a rock cut not by human hands, hits the foot of the statue, and the whole image becomes like chaff on the threshing floor. Well, the rock becomes a huge mountain and fills the whole earth. Did that happen? Do we have one nation like a rock that's filled the whole world? We don't. What would that be? Would that be Europe? Would that be America? Would that be China? What does that even mean? We haven't had. Now, some apologists will say, well, that could have been England, because at one time the English had an empire that was so big that the sun didn't set on it. But you're just retrofitting stuff in there. It doesn't make any sense. If you're interested in messianic prophecies, how you can debunk those, I have a great book for that. It's an affiliate link. If you buy it through me, great. If you don't. But it's, what is it, Mark versus the Hebrew Bible. So this is a great one where the author breaks down sentence by sentence, word by word, the prophecies and what Jesus actually did. So that's a great book. Get it and tell me how you like it. Number 4 is Cyrus the Great. So let's see what she has to say. Isaiah mentioned Cyrus by name and predicted that he would open the gates of Babylon to free the Jewish exiles, seemingly over a century before Cyrus was born. The Cyrus cylinder 403, an ancient clay artifact, confirms that Cyrus the Great did indeed conquer Babylon and allow displaced people to return to their homelands. This policy of reparation was a distinct shift from previous conquerors and aligns perfectly with the Bible narrative. Historians accept that the Cyrus cylinder as a primary document that verifies the Persian king's unusual degree of tolerance. Even those who doubt the supernatural origin of the prophecy admit that the historical actions of Cyrus align precisely with the biblical account. The specificity of his name and policy remains one of the most debated, yet historically verified aspects of the text. The scholarly consensus is that these verses, these chapters, were added later. Isaiah is an anthology written by many different people. And so it's almost certain that anything after chapter 40 was added in later, was glued together with another book. And now the whole thing's, called Isaiah. So this really would not have been a prediction. In fact, it just would have been writing something that was contemporary. In fact, the text doesn't even pretend otherwise. Cyrus the Great was written as a contemporary and the fall of Babylon as a finished event. The prophecy in these verses is really about the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So is that really hard to predict? So what you have left after you take away the stuff that was added in is the fall of Babylon and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Is that something that would take a divine God to predict, or could a human just predict that? Like we can predict what might happen in the future or the near future to countries around us. Kind of silly. Number 5 is the dispersion of Israel. So the book of Deuteronomy warns that if the Israelites turned away, they would be scattered from one end of the earth to the other. History records the Jewish diaspora as a factual reality, with communities established in virtually every nation following the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people maintained their identity despite having no central homeland. The global scattering is a demographic anomaly that historians and sociologists have studied extensively. Few other ancient people groups have been so dispersed so widely while retaining their distinct culture and religious heritage over millennia. The scale of this dispersion matches the removed into all kingdoms of the earth description found in ancient writings. Now, I'm going to assume that she's talking about this passage. So this would be out of chapter 28, verse 64. Moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. There you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which you or your fathers have not known. Doesn't that directly contradict with what she said? The prophecy says that they will start worshiping other gods, that you or their fathers hadn't known, of stone and wood. But doesn't she say, and we know it's true, that actually they kept their distinct culture and religion intact? So that goes directly against the prophecy. Also, that they were scattered from one end of the earth to the other. Why is it that the Jews primarily were scattered into Eastern Europe and the Middle East, parts of the Middle East? Why isn't it that we don't see them, we didn't find them when we went to China? Why weren't we finding Jews in China or Japan or sub-Saharan Africa? What about in South America? Heck, when we showed up to North America and we found the native population here, were they Jews? Now, there is some talk about, yes, they were one of the lost tribes. Nobody buys that. I'm sorry, I'm choking and laughing about that, because I think the Mormons believe that the Native Americans are one of the lost tribes of Israel. But anyway, no modern historian actually thinks that. So we're going to brand this prophecy as unfulfilled. So number 6 is going to be talking about the restoration of Israel. So this is what the author says. Prophecies in Ezekiel and Isaiah spoke of a time when the Jewish people would be gathered from all nations and brought back to their ancient land. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 is a matter of historical record, making a rare instance of a people group returning to their ancestral home after centuries. This event shifted the geopolitical dynamic of the Middle East and fulfilled the gathering prediction. While politics are complex, the physical return of millions of people to the specific geographical region is a verifiable demographic shift. According to Reuters, in 2023, over 3 million people visited Israel, many flocking to see a nation that was essentially reborn from the pages of history. The revival of the Hebrew language, once only used in prayer, further cements this restoration as a unique historical phenomenon. Ezekiel 37 also says that the northern and southern kingdoms would be reunited. Has that happened? No. It also says they would be ruled by a prince of David. Has that happened? No. And if you think that the founding of Israel wasn't driven by people reading into the Old Testament, so forcing this prophecy to happen, then you are deluded, because that's exactly what happened. These are the Zionist movement that they've been trying to create a land for Israel ever since they were, dispersed, basically. So really, it's a whole bunch of meaningless mumbo jumbo. This next one is an outright lie. This author is lying. I don't know where she got this from or where she heard this from. This one is a new one to me. So let's get into it. Number 7, the closing of the Golden Gate. Ezekiel predicted that the eastern gate of Jerusalem would be shut and no man would enter it because the Lord had entered by it. In 16th century, Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent sealed the specific gate and has remained bricked to this day. A century later, a cemetery was later placed in front of it, seemingly creating a double barrier against any potential kingly entry. Skeptics acknowledge that the gate is physically sealed, just as the text describes, regardless of the motivation behind the construction. It stands as a visible, tangible example of a prediction that can be verified by anyone walking around the walls of the city today. In fact, it remains the only sealed gate among the city's active entrances, and it's a historical curiosity that aligns with prophecy. Okay, so let's read the verse. This comes out of Ezekiel 44:2. And the Lord said to me, the gate shall remain shut, it shall not be opened, and no one shall enter by it. For the Lord God of Israel has entered by it. Therefore it will remain shut. Okay, so this was not a prophecy. This was instructions. So Ezekiel was having visions of the second temple and how it would be built and the gates coming into it and how that would all work. It wasn't a prophecy in the sense that we're talking about. It was a vision of how it was going to be. And so God said, I'm going to be coming in through this eastern gate. So after that, it needs to be shut off so that, people just can't willy-nilly walk through it because it's holy now. That's what it meant. So the priests, once the temple was built, then they would have that shut off. It has nothing to do with it being bricked up later or anything of that sort. That whole thing is just a ludicrous lie. It's laughable. It's disgusting. And I don't know. I'd like to know what apologist she got that from. Number 8, we're going to Nineveh. We're going to be talking about Nineveh's watery end, which that doesn't sound good, does it? So the prophet Nahum predicted that Nineveh would be destroyed with an overwhelming flood, and the fire would devour its bars. Archaeologists excavating the site found layers of ash and evidence that the Kor River had indeed flooded, breaching the walls and allowing the Babylonians to enter. The combination of flood damage and fire damage is consistent with the physical strata found at the site. For years, the location of Nineveh was lost, leading some to doubt it ever existed as a major power. But once discovered, the ruins provided hard evidence that the city fell exactly through the breach of its water defenses and subsequent burning. This confirmed the specific method of destruction that had been written down centuries prior. Okay, so to debunk this one, you have to listen carefully. The dates are critically important. I'm going to have to read some of this because I don't have it memorized. I'm not Dan McClellan, so excuse me if I have to read some of this. First of all, no one knows when the book of Nahum was written. Nobody knows that. Most scholars believe that it was between 663 BCE and 612 BCE, which is the year that Nineveh fell. So that's important, remembering that 612 BCE is when Nineveh fell. Okay, so second, Babylon and Assyria, they had been fighting for over 12 years before Nineveh fell. And before they had captured Nineveh, they had destroyed and sacked many cities, several of them along the way. So it's very possible that the prophet was watching all of this happen and was kind of hoping that this would happen to Nineveh. That's the first thing. Now, predicting that a city that sits on a major river like the Tigris and then has a tributary running right through the middle of it that they would get water from, that it would flood, wow, that's really not much of a bold prediction. That's like predicting that Miami is eventually going to get a hurricane that will destroy it, or at least partially destroy it. So actually, these floods happened on the regular. On the regular, in the springtime, the snowpack in the Turkish mountains, it melts and it comes down and it would flood the city. And then they would rebuild. And I'm assuming some years it was very little flooding or minor flooding, and then every once in a while, maybe they had a 100-year flood and it would just, flood completely and it'd have to rebuild. We know this because we have places in America by the Mississippi River that flood over and over and over again, sometimes not very badly, sometimes wiping out whole cities. So don't you think the Babylonians would have been aware of this, that this happens every spring? And so they know that this might be a great time to get into the city and sack it and burn it. Burning a city down after you breach the walls, wow, that is nothing. That is what they did. That's how it happened. So if you actually go and read the passages where it talks about this in this book, you will see, because I did, I got it out and I read the whole thing. I read the entire, it's a little tiny book. It's mostly poetic. It's very lavish descriptions of, what the soldiers were wearing, and it's very light on specific details. Very, very vague and very, very light. So take that, do what you will with it. I'm going to call this a fail. This next one is really, really interesting. I think you guys are going to like it, and it's something that is a major world attraction. So let's see what the author has to say. It's Petra's Desolation. Jeremiah predicted that Edom would become a terrible desolation and its cities would be uninhabited forever. Today, the ancient city of Petra stands as a magnificent but empty tourist attraction with no living civilization residing within its carved rock dwellings. The Edomite culture has completely vanished from history, leaving only stone monuments behind. While Bedouins have lived in the caves nearby, the organized nation and city-state structure predicted to collapse has never returned. The complete disappearance of the Edomite people as a distinct ethnic group stands in contrast to their neighbors who survive. This aligns with the perpetual waste description, a status that history has maintained for thousands of years. So let's read the actual prophecy. This is out of Jeremiah 49, 7 through 18. And of course, I'm not reading all of it. I'm just going to read a little bit. Edom will be stripped bare. Her hiding places will be uncovered. You who live in the clefts of the rocks, from there I will bring you down. So no man will live there, no man will dwell in it. Okay, first of all, it's important to understand that the city of Petra is never mentioned in the Bible by name. There's a city called Selah, and it's important to note that that just means rock or cliff. It's not known whether the city of Selah is actually Petra. We don't know that. So you need to understand that Petra was never named. They're just guessing that Selah was Petra. That's the first thing. We don't know. Now, I need you to keep these. This is another one where dates are going to be really important. Understand that Selah, Petra, was not the same as it looks today in Jeremiah's time. So Jeremiah lived from 650 BCE to about 570 BCE. So in Jeremiah's time, the Edomite kingdom was already in steep decline from its glory years 1,000 years before. These people were on the steep decline. So predicting that they would decline further and be wiped out really wasn't much of a stretch anyway. So here's the kicker, though. Here's the thing that's the absolute kicker, is that Petra Selah was not anything what it looks like now. It was literally just people living in the cliffs, living down there. There was none of those elaborate stone carvings. That didn't happen until the 4th century, by the time the Edomites were gone, and we had a whole new empire starting. So the Nabateans, they're the ones that came in the 4th century. Well, after the Edomites, they're gone. They come in, and they're the ones that made the beautiful stone carvings that we have today. It became, after the Edomites left, not only was it not desolate and a wasteland, this is when it became the wealthy and prominent trading city that we see the remnants of today. And we know that it was inhabited, at least, from the glory days until its decline, from 400 BCE all the way to 1200 CE. Do you see how long that is? What is that? Almost 1700 years? So this prophecy fails. It's a lie. The whole thing, I don't know where she got these horrible apologist talking points. The scary thing is there's Christians that will read these articles, they'll believe it, they don't check into the prophecies and what the actual historical facts are, and they'll run with it. That's the scary part of it. Why do Christians lie? Why do they lie? Now, as far as the Edomites, they didn't disappear. It's not like every one of them was killed off. Actually, what happened is they migrated closer to where Israel was. I think the kingdom of Judea, don't quote me on that, but they assimilated into Jewish culture, and most of them converted into Judaism because these people were genetically in their DNA, they were very, very close. In fact, kissing cousins basically. So they just assimilated into the Jewish culture. That's what happened to them. They didn't disappear, just assimilated. That would be like saying, for instance, people from Mexico that came here and have assimilated into American culture have disappeared. They haven't disappeared, they're still Mexican. So stupid. Number 10. Oh, you guys are going to love this one because it fits so well in what's going on in modern society. It's number 10, persecution of believers. Early text warned that followers would be hated by all nations and subjected to tribulation for their beliefs. Open Doors today confirms that Christians remain the most persecuted religious group globally, facing restrictions in over 70 countries. This animosity continues despite the religion's emphasis on peace and charity. Oh, really? Does it? Anyway, the persistence of this opposition, even in modern pluralistic societies, mirrors the ancient warnings given to early adherents. A Gallup poll that found while only 20% of Americans view the Bible as the literal Word of God, the cultural friction surrounding its teachings remains high. The tension between faith and the broader culture was anticipated in this constant reality. I'm assuming that she's talking about the passage in Matthew 24:9, which says, "Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me." First of all, I checked into who Open Doors was. They are a Christian charity And their whole mission is getting money to help persecuted Christians. So who knows if their statistics are meaningful or not. This is how they raise money. So I don't know. Of course, there are countries where, especially Muslim countries, where Christians are persecuted. We know that. You don't have to be an Einstein to figure that the Christians have persecuted the Muslims and the Muslims have persecuted the Christians. Even today it goes on, right? So whatever. I don't consider that a prophecy. That's just, reality of whenever two religions butt heads, someone's going to be persecuted. So 23% of Americans are fundamentalists, meaning they believe in the inerrant word of God. But over 70% of the population believes in a God, usually the Abrahamic God. So they're not persecuted here. If anything, atheists are persecuted. I used to think I was a persecuted Christian, but now I see the other way, and that wasn't true, and it's not true now. Christians are people that believe in God, the Abrahamic God, are the vast and overwhelming portion of America. I mean, look what our leadership is, right? Look at the whole leadership. I mean, even Donald Trump, a Christian, I guess. So now, the other part of this is that it says Christians will be persecuted in all nations. Go back and read it. It says all nations. Are Christians persecuted in all nations? They're being put to death? Yeah, maybe for a short time they were put to death. Christians put other Christians to death. They were persecuting each other. I mean, go back and read about the European wars. Who's Catholic, who's Protestant? They're persecuting each other far more than anyone else ever has. What a load. What a bunch of crap. Number 11. We're almost reaching the end. These last couple ones are good, though, so stick around. The spread of the gospel. The New Testament predicted the message of Christianity would be preached in all the world to all nations before the end comes. From a small group of fishermen in Galilee, this faith has grown to become the largest religion globally, reaching every continent and culture. Sociologists track this growth as one of the most successful ideological expansions in human history. Even secular observers admit that the transmission of these texts to the remotest parts of the globe is a statistical marvel. Data from the YouVersion Bible app shows that in 2024 alone, daily engagement hit 14 million users, demonstrating the continued global reach of this message. This text has crossed linguistic and cultural barriers that usually halt other movements. So I'm guessing she's talking about Matthew 24:14. Let's read it. Let's see what it says. It says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testament to all nations, and then the end will come." So she's admitting that and bragging on the fact that the gospel has really reached everyone in the world. There's really nobody at this point that doesn't understand, that hasn't heard Jesus and understands, what Christianity is all about, at least in some rudimentary form. So she's admitting that. But isn't that a problem? Because then the end is supposed to come. Now, I'm going to be really generous here. I'm going to say that by the year 1900, probably almost all nations, maybe not every single person, but all nations had heard about Christianity, because the missionary movement it's been huge basically since the 1st century AD. And into the 1500s, I think they had reached almost all nations in Asia and Africa, everywhere. This had been heard. I mean, maybe not maybe some remote hunter and gatherer tribe in South America might not have heard it, but every nation had heard of it. It had spread to every single continent. So what's God waiting for? Now, you really can't argue that today. Since the modern time, since the 1950s, probably the last 70 years, TVs, radios, now we have, of course, the internet, the end is supposed to come. So no, this prophecy has not been fulfilled because the end hasn't come. Man, if you've stuck with me this far, you must really like me. And I know I like you. I love you. So if you would like to join my channel and help defray my costs, I would love it. But please give me a like, give me a comment. It really helps. And I'd love to know what you guys think about all this. I just don't understand why Christians lie. I don't understand it. I mean, wouldn't you just give this up? Why bother? Why bother with all the lies? I don't get it. Anyway, let's read number 12. 12 is knowledge and travel increase. The book of Daniel suggests a time when many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. The last century has seen an exponential rise in transportation technology and information access that has fundamentally changed human existence. The ability to travel globally in hours and access the sum of human knowledge instantly is a thoroughly modern development. Skeptics interpret this as a general observation, but they cannot deny that the acceleration of travel and data in our era is unprecedented. Recent reports from the American Bible Society in 2025 note a surprising 19% surge in Bible engagement among young men, suggesting that even in the age of information overload, ancient texts still circulate. Pew Research projects that if current trends continue, the Christian population will reach 2.9 billion by 2025, showing that this knowledge continues to expand alongside of our technology. This is the easiest to debunk. Name me a time in history where transportation and technology hasn't been expanding. The last century, yes, we've had airplanes and trains have become, we have bullet trains and all this, but name a time in history, even during the so-called dark ages, where things weren't advancing. They've always been advancing. And who knows what the next century will bring. Maybe we'll be teleported. And now we'll take this prophecy and we'll say, look at, 100 years ago they could only be on airplanes. Now we're being teleported. Now we're doing space rockets. Now we have flying cars. So it's the easiest to debunk. No, it's general, it's vague. People going to and fro. What the heck? It's just stupid, ridiculous, dumb. It's a prophecy that could go into any age. They were probably saying this 200 years ago. Oh, look at, we have steamships now. Remember we had wooden boats with sails on them. Now we have steamships. What, have steamships been around about 200 years now? Oh, we have trains that have crossed the whole country. When did that happen? That happened, what, around the turn of the century, around 1900? 150 years ago, trains crisscrossed the entire country, and they could have used this prophecy then. Do you see what I'm saying? Easy to debunk. Lies, ridiculous. I hate it that Christians lie. I don't know why they do it. All right, guys, I'll see you next time.